It was a Tuesday in February, and I was standing in our kitchen in my pajamas, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Unknown number, early morning, the kind of call I usually let go to voicemail and forget about by noon. But something made me pick it up. I don't know what. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe I just needed a reason to stop staring out at the backyard where the snow had piled up against the fence overnight. "Is this Serena Calloway?" "Yes," I said. "This is TD Bank, Miss Calloway. I'm calling about your joint account with Mr. Owen. Sorry, with Mr. Griffin Walsh. I need to ask you to come into the branch today if you can, and I'd prefer you come alone." She paused. "Please don't mention this call to your husband. I need to back up. Griffin and I met at a work conference in Vancouver. I was 31, freshly promoted to senior project manager at an environmental consulting firm, and I had flown out from Toronto for 4 days of panels and networking events that I mostly found exhausting. I am not someone who loves a conference. I don't do well with small talk over mediocre, catered food, and I lose my voice by day 2 from having to speak slightly louder than is comfortable in every single room. I was standing near the back of a panel discussion about sustainable urban planning, pretending to take notes on my phone, when the man next to me leaned over and whispered, "Do you think anyone would notice if we left?" It wasn't even a question. He said it flat, like a statement. I looked at him. He was tall, kind of rumpled, wearing a lanyard that said Griffin Walsh, Infrastructure Finance, Walsh and Okafor Consulting, Toronto. "I think they'd notice," I whispered back. "Worth it, though." We slipped out during the Q&A. We ended up at a bar 2 blocks away and talked for 3 hours. He was funny in a quiet way, the kind of funny where you don't always realize he's made a joke until a few seconds later. He asked good questions. He actually listened to the answers. By the time we said goodnight, I had already decided I wanted to see him again. He called me 2 days after we both got back to Toronto. We went for dinner in the Annex. And then again the following week. And then it just became the thing we did, and neither of us made a big announcement about it. We were just together. He was careful with money in a way that I found reassuring at the time. Thoughtful about it. He tracked things. He had spreadsheets. I don't love spreadsheets, but I love knowing someone is paying attention. My dad was the kind of person who never balanced a check, and my parents spent most of my childhood with a low-grade financial anxiety hanging over everything. And I told myself I wasn't going to live like that. Griffin seemed like the opposite of that. He seemed steady. We moved in together after 14 months into a semi-detached on a quiet street in Leslieville. His name went on the mortgage with mine because he insisted on contributing equally, which I appreciated. We split everything down the middle. Groceries, utilities, the internet bill. There was something almost clinical about it at first, but I got used to it. It felt fair. We got married in September. Small wedding. Just family and close friends. A venue out in Prince Edward County, the kind of place with a barn and long wooden tables and candles in mason jars. My sister, Blythe, was my maid of honor. His best man was his old university friend, a guy named Todd, who flew in from Calgary. The weather was perfect. I cried during the vows, which I hadn't expected to do. That evening, standing outside watching people move between the tables, Blythe put her arm around me and said, "You look happy." "I am," I said, and I was. I genuinely was. 4 months later, I was standing in my kitchen in my pajamas, being told by a stranger on the phone not to mention the call to my husband. I stood very still. "Can you tell me what this is about?" I said. I kept my voice even. I'm good at keeping my voice even. It's something I've trained myself to do in meetings, in difficult client calls, in moments when I need to not show what's happening inside me. "I'd rather discuss it in person," she said. "Are you able to come in today?" "To the branch on Queen Street?" I can come in this afternoon, I said. 3 o'clock? 3 o'clock, I said. I hung up. I stood there for another minute. Griffin was still upstairs. I could hear him moving around, the water running in the bathroom. I poured my cold coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and set it on the drying rack. I drove to work. I sat through a morning of meetings. I ate lunch at my desk, and at 2:15, I told my assistant I had a personal appointment, and I left. The woman who had called me was named Paula. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the particular calm of someone who has delivered difficult news many times and has learned to do it with a kind of steadiness that isn't cold, exactly, but isn't warm either. She closed the door to her office. She offered me water. I said, "Yes." "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "I'm going to show you some transaction records from the joint account you hold with your husband, and I want to walk you through what we've flagged." She turned her monitor so I could see it. I am a person who understands financial documents. I work adjacent to finance. I read reports. I know what I'm looking at. What I was looking at did not see it. Over the past 11 months, which meant starting roughly 3 months before our wedding, there had been a series of transfers out of our joint account. Not large single amounts. Small ones, $200 here, $350 there. Once, $600 over 4 transactions in the same week. Each one categorized differently. Groceries, utilities, home repairs, gas. In total, across 11 months, just over $19,000. We flagged this because the pattern is consistent with what we call financial structuring, Paula said. Small transactions designed to stay below reporting thresholds. It's not something we see often in personal accounts, but when we do, we have a responsibility to look into it. And when we looked into where these transfers were going, she paused. They weren't going to any of the vendors they were labeled as. They were going to a second account, a personal account, not a joint account, one that your name is not on. I looked at the screen. I looked at the account number she was pointing to. "That's not my account," I said. "No," she said. "It isn't. Whose is it?" She held my gaze. "It's registered to your husband." I drove home. I don't entirely remember the drive. I know I stopped at a red light on Parliament Street, and I sat there for what must have been longer than I realized because the car behind me honked. I know I parked 2 streets over from our house and sat in the car for a while. I don't know how long. $19,000. I kept doing the math, not because I needed to. Paula had already done the math. But I kept doing it anyway, the way you do when something doesn't fit in your head yet. We had the joint account for the house, shared expenses. That had been Griffin's idea, actually. Easier to track, he'd said. We both contribute equally. Everything comes out of one place. I'd thought it was a good system. And it was. Except that while money was going in from both of us, money was also going out, quietly. In amounts too small to catch unless you were looking very carefully or unless a bank compliance officer happened to flag it. I had never looked very carefully. I trusted him. I don't say that with bitterness, or I'm trying not to. I say it as a fact. I trusted him completely. That's what you do, I thought. That's what marriage is. I sat in the car until my hands stopped shaking. Then, I went inside and made dinner, and I didn't say a word. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I don't do things impulsively. I have a tendency, actually, that people who know me find slightly maddening, to go very calm and very quiet when things go wrong, and to start making lists. So that's what I did. Over the next 9 days, I made lists. I called my friend Asha, who is a family lawyer. I didn't tell her everything, not at first. I said I had a hypothetical situation I wanted to talk through. By our second phone call, it wasn't hypothetical anymore. She helped me understand what I was dealing with. I went back to Paula at the bank twice. I got copies of every statement. Going back to the month, Griffin and I opened the account together. I cross-referenced them against my own records. The transfers started, as Paula had said, approximately 3 months before our wedding. I also hired someone. A financial investigator. You can find them, they exist, they're not cheap, and it was worth every dollar. Her name was Rochelle, and she had the energy of someone who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. She had the information I needed within a week. The second account was not a savings account. It wasn't a rainy day fund he'd been building without telling me. It wasn't some embarrassing secret like a gambling problem he was hiding. It was the account he used to pay rent. Rent for an apartment in Cabottown. A 1-bedroom on Amelia Street. The lease was in his name. It had been in his name for 14 months. He had signed it the same month we moved in together. He had never given it up. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you about the last weekend in October, about 3 weeks before we got married. Griffin and I had gone up to his parents' place in Collingwood for the long weekend. His mother, Lydia, makes a lamb stew that I love. We went for a long hike on Saturday, and on the way back he reached over and took my hand and said, "I can't believe we get to do this all the time." I had thought he meant us. The two of us. The life we were making. I think about that moment a lot now. I think about what he meant when he said all the time. And I think about how many other weekends there were, and I think about who was in that apartment on Amelia Street while I was in Collingwood with his family eating lamb stew and believing everything. I'm going to tell you now what I did, and I want to be honest. I did not handle it the way they do in movies. I didn't confront him in the rain. I didn't throw things. I didn't send a dramatic text. I talked to Asha. I got my documentation in order. And then, on a Sunday evening in early March, after Griffin had come home from what he said was a squash game with Todd, I sat down across from him at the kitchen table and I put a folder of documents between us. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. "Sit down," I said. He sat down. I'd thought about this moment for 9 days. I'd rehearsed it, actually. Not in a strange way. I just needed to know what I was going to say, so I didn't lose the thread when I was standing in the middle of it. I knew I needed to be specific. I knew I couldn't be emotional, not because emotions weren't appropriate, but because I needed him to know that I wasn't guessing. I wasn't suspicious. I knew. "The bank flagged transfers from our joint account," I said. $19,460 over the last 11 months. Categorized as household expenses, going to a personal account you didn't tell me existed. That account has been used to pay rent on an apartment on Amelia Street for the past 14 months. The lease started the same month we moved in together. He didn't say anything. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I said. "I have all the documentation. I'm not here to have an argument. I'm here because I needed to look at you and say this out loud." He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the folder like it was something that had appeared out of nowhere rather than something he had created. "Serena," he said. "Don't," I said. "Please don't do the thing where you start with my name." There was a long silence. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that. He didn't try to tell me I'd misread the documents or that there was an explanation I was missing. He sat there with the particular expression of someone who has been caught not at the edge of something, but right in the middle of it, and he knew it. "How long?" I said. He looked at his hands. "Griffin, how long?" It's been complicated," he said. "That's not what I asked." 2 years, he said. 2 years. We had been together for 2.5 years. We had been dating for 6 months when whatever this was had started. I nodded. I had known the approximate answer before I asked. Rochelle's report had made the timeline fairly clear, but I wanted to hear him say it. "Okay," I said. I picked up my folder and I stood up. "My lawyer will be in touch," I said. "I'm going to stay at Blythe's tonight. I'd like you to make arrangements, please. I'll give you 2 weeks. I put on my coat. I picked up the bag I had already packed that morning and left by the front door. I didn't slam it. My sister opened the door before I had finished knocking. She had that look, the kind where someone knows something is wrong but is trying to give you the space to say it in your own time. She put her arms around me in the doorway, and I stood there in the cold for a minute. "Do you want to talk?" she said. "Not tonight," I said. "Okay," she said. I made soup. I love my sister more than I have words for. The divorce took 7 months. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever been through, logistically. We didn't have children. We had the house, which was the main thing to sort out, and we sorted it out. I bought him out of his share. Asha helped me make sure the settlement accounted for the money that had been redirected from our joint account. Every dollar of it. There were moments that were harder than others. Signing the final papers. Running into his mother at the grocery store in the fall, she stopped, started to say something, and then didn't, and we both stood in the cereal aisle for a moment before she said, "I'm sorry, Rena," and I believed her, taking his name off the mortgage. That one, for some reason, made me cry in the bank parking lot for about 10 minutes. Not because I wanted him on it. Just because of what it represented, I think. The life I thought I was building. I put the house on the market in November. Bought a condo near Broadview. It's mine. Just mine. I painted the bedroom a color called Quiet Rain, which sounds like it should be on a scented candle, but looks genuinely beautiful in the morning light. People ask me sometimes what the worst part was, and I know the expected answer is the betrayal itself, the other person, the secret apartment. And those things were terrible. I won't minimize them. But if I'm honest, the worst part was the money. Not because of the amount. We're not talking about a life-ruining sum. I'm okay. I've always been careful, and I had savings of my own, and I was able to handle it. It was what the money meant. He had been building an exit strategy since before we even moved in together. Since before we got engaged. Since before we stood in that barn in Prince Edward County in the September sunlight and said things in front of everyone we loved. He married me anyway. With the apartment on Amelia Street already paid for, with a plan B already in place, and I keep thinking about the spreadsheets, the way he tracked things, the careful system. He had been using that same carefulness, that same precision that I had found so reassuring to hide something from me the entire time. I trusted him because he seemed like someone who paid attention. And he was. He just wasn't paying attention to us. I don't tell this story to make him the villain. Exactly, although I won't pretend I don't have moments where I feel entitled to some anger about it. I tell it because I think it's one of those things that can happen quietly, the kind of thing that doesn't look like anything from the outside. A healthy relationship. 2 people with a good system, shared expenses, a house in Leslieville, and underneath it, for the entire time, a separate account, a separate apartment, a separate life, running parallel to the one I thought we were building together. I think about the bank call sometimes. Paula's voice. The way she said, "Please don't mention this call to your husband." She didn't owe me that protection. She didn't have to flag it. She could have let the account continue operating until something larger triggered a review. But she caught it, and she called me, and because of that, I found out on a Tuesday morning in February with my coffee going cold instead of years later, or never. I sent her a card. I know that sounds like a strange thing to do. I sent her a card anyway. It said, "Thank you for paying attention when I wasn't. I spent last summer in Cape Breton with Blythe and her family. We rented a house near Ingonish for 2 weeks. I hiked the Cabot Trail and swam in water that was far too cold and ate lobster rolls for approximately 8 consecutive days and came home with my shoulders burned and my head clearer than it had been in over a year. The condo was waiting for me. My condo. My quiet rain walls and my east-facing windows, and the particular light that comes through in the mornings when it hits the kitchen at the right angle. I had built it. From the wreckage of something that wasn't what I thought it was, I had built something that was entirely mine. And I won't say I'm not still figuring out what that means, because I am. I won't pretend some mornings don't still feel strange. They do, but there is something that I know now that I didn't know when I was standing in that barn in September with tears on my face, believing everything. I know what my own life feels like when I'm the one holding it. And it turns out that's not nothing. It turns out that's actually quite a lot.